dessas impressões que possam ter. Bom trabalho e até logo, estamos por cá todos. Boa tarde. Obrigada.
Muito obrigado. Sim, sim. Ok. Vamos dar então início à sessão de trabalhos de hoje à tarde. O painel da tarde, conforme podem ver aí na programação, é composto por 3 fotógrafos. Colin Mcpherson, que veio da Escócia, pertence à Document Scotland. Temos depois, a seguir, o António Pedrosa, que é um dos fotógrafos convidados também do Entre, Margens. E para fechar a sessão de hoje, teremos também a intervenção do Brian Griffin, que é um dos fotógrafos também convidados do projeto Entre Margens. Espero que apreciem este painel e vamos dar então início. Obrigado.
Olá. Estimados senhoras e senhores, muito obrigado por me invitar aqui no Festival Entre Margens. Estou muito feliz de estar aqui. That's the most difficult thing I'm going to say all day. Also, you've proved to me that beautiful lunch hasn't made you fall asleep just yet. So I'm going to try and keep you awake for the next half hour at least. I'm going to be the warm-up for the next 2 great photographers. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Document Scotland, and then I'm going to show some work. I've prepared some notes. I'm going to read initially from those notes, and then I'm going to kind of talk more informally about the work that you'll see. So as a way of introduction, Document Scotland is a collective established in 2012 by 4 internationally recognized photographers, brought together to explore, record, and disseminate the ideas, themes, and stories of our nation as it moves towards the most pivotal moment in its modern history. The catalyst for the formation of Document Scotland was twofold. Firstly, on 18th September 2014, just over 1 year from now, there will be a referendum in which the people of Scotland will decide whether the country should become an independent nation state once again and reverse the decision made by a small number of unelected parliamentarians in 1707 to form a political union with the other countries of the British Isles, which resulted in the formation of the United Kingdom. Everyone resident in Scotland will be entitled to take part in this vote, and with a little over a year from the referendum, it is hard to predict which view will prevail in the end. What is certain is that whatever the outcome, a period of profound change will sweep across not only Scotland, but its larger neighbour across the border, and these changes may well have an impact beyond those boundaries too. The other decisive factor in the establishment of Document Scotland was the feeling and belief that, and this is backed up by statements and comments from a number of people, that documentary photography in Scotland was moribund, and that a tradition which had stretched back to the beginnings of photography itself was dead. This gave the 4 founding members of the newly created collective the incentive and impetus to, on the one hand, produce a visual record and legacy of the extraordinary period of time that we're living through, and maybe just as importantly, prove wrong those who had made the claims about the death of photography in Scotland. As my first task, I'd like to introduce you briefly to the 4 founder members of the collective before outlining some of the thinking behind Document Scotland and show examples of the work, both historical and contemporary, which we are showcasing on our website, at events, and in publications. Jeremy Sutton-Hibbert is an editorial photojournalist who has spent the last 10 years working in Japan for editorial, commercial, and NGO clients such as Greenpeace. His list of publications is extensive, everyone from Time magazine through international media organizations, newspapers, and magazines. and he's built up a substantial archive of his 10 years in Japan. He documented very closely the tsunami and resultant nuclear incident in 2011, and with a young family in Japan felt that that was a good time to finish his work in Japan and come back to Scotland. The impetus for that was also the political situation developing in Scotland, and he saw a twin opportunity. One, to leave Japan at a time when it was possibly a good time to do so, and secondly, to come back to his native country and make work. Sophie Gerard has been based in London for the last 7 years, studying photography and working as an independent photographer. Her reputation has grown in that period, and she's now recognized as one of the foremost emerging talents in British photography. Her background is in environmental photography, but she cares a lot about not only the natural environment, but her social environment as well. And she's covered stories and editorial assignments for a number of top newspapers and magazines across the globe. Myself, I have been away from Scotland for 10 years, but I'm committed, although I still live in England, to returning to Scotland over the next period of time to make work. My background is as an editorial photographer, first of all in Scotland, and I moved to England, to the northwest of England, to Liverpool 10 years ago. My main clients include The Times, The Independent, The Guardian, other leading national and international publications. Over that time, I've been involved in a number of different initiatives and projects, including, along with Patrick Henry, being one of the founder members of the Look Photography Festival, which you heard about earlier. The last member of our collective is Stephen McLaren. Stephen may well be known to you as one of the co-authors of the important and seminal book, Street Photography Now. Currently moving between London, Los Angeles, and Scotland, making work on both sides of the Atlantic. Stephen's reputation as a fantastic picture maker, somebody who engages with subjects and has a very unique eye and very unique way of storytelling, has meant that his reputation as a photographer in the 6 or 7 years he's worked professionally has gained a lot of international recognition. So, the theme of The Wandering Scot, of course, is very close to our hearts. It documents Scotland. All 4 of us have spent, as you've heard, time living out with our mother country. Indeed, when we cooked up the idea for the collective last year, the initial meeting was in Beijing, in a dingy backstreet bar. We were all working on a project in China. We felt that due to the political situation and the opportunities to come home and make work, we simply couldn't resist the urge to go back to Scotland. The country, we felt, had changed a lot since we'd been away. Self-government on a limited basis has certainly changed the country socially, culturally, and aesthetically. But by returning to Scotland, we do not aspire to be part of the establishment or an arm of the tourist board, there to promote all the fine things our country can offer, as you can see here. Whiskey, golf, tartan, history, haggis, natural beauty. As photographers, we seek to challenge cliché and assumption, question decision makers and their authority, and make informed comment and contribution to any debate about the well-known social ills which befall Scotland: chronic poverty, terrible health, high dependency on alcohol, high levels of inequality, and low levels of aspiration and self-confidence amongst them. We are a non-political, non-aligned collective, and we seek to ask questions about Scottish society and about life in Scotland and beyond its borders. We want to challenge assumptions about Scots and Scotland, explore issues around the complexity of Scottish identity, but above all, we want to make photography which reflects what we find and what we're interested in representing. Although Scotland is a small country, its current 5.3 population being at a record high, it has long made a contribution internationally way beyond its size. Many of the great inventions of our age were made by Scots, the television, the telephone, to name but two, while Scots scientists, artists, engineers and soldiers have made their presence known in the respective fields down through generations, both home and especially abroad. In the arts too, Scots have excelled. Indeed, a number of pioneering photographers and forebears of today's documentary photography were Scots, from Thomas Annan and his depiction of the Victorian slums of Glasgow, to Hill and Adamson's meticulous record of the fisherfolk of New Haven. Scots embraced new practices of 19th century photography and were at the forefront of developing techniques which allowed social issues to be aired and expressed and seen by a growing and inquisitive audience. At Document Scotland, we want to raise awareness of this history, and we made a decision that on our website, which we created as a first step, we wanted this to be a means of communicating work and ideas and to show historical photography, often by photographers whose work had not gained wide public recognition or had emerged recently for the first time in collections and archives. One of our earliest features on our website was the work of John Thompson. Born in 1837, a true pioneer in every sense, in that not only did he embrace photography at a time of public skepticism, he physically took it to uncharted territories when he became the first photographer to make work in China, often in parts of that vast country which had never before seen a white face, never mind a camera. Thompson was a photographer, geographer and traveller. He was one of the first people with a camera to travel in the Far East, documenting people, landscapes and artifacts. In 1862 he left Edinburgh for Singapore and began a 10-year period spent travelling around the Far East. Initially he established a business in Singapore, taking portraits of European merchants, and he developed an interest in local people and places. After visiting India and Ceylon in 1864, he travelled back to Bangkok and sold his business, his photography studio business. He then made a series of portraits of the King of Siam, and after a year back in Britain, he decided to try to conquer China, as it was. He returned to Singapore in 1867 before moving to Saigon and then established a studio in Hong Kong, from where he traveled all over China for 4 years. Upon returning home, he took up work amongst the street people of London, which cemented his reputation, and he is regarded as a classic instance of a social documentary photographer, and his work laid the foundations for photojournalism. He went on to become a portrait photographer of high society in Mayfair and gained a royal warrant in 1881. So this idea of showing historical work as well as contemporary work means that we felt that we had a rich history to draw on, but we wanted to set in context the work that we were also making, because a number of us in the collective have been making work about Scotland for a number of years. This particular project is my own project, and it documents the last wild salmon fishermen of Scotland. This is a scene which you cannot see anymore off the coast of Scotland, simply because this method of working has disappeared. At the time when I started this project in 1994, this site was quite common along the vast shoreline of Scotland. There were many teams of men, many of these netting stations, all working to catch the wild salmon, intercept the salmon as it returned to the native breeding rivers across Scotland. My motivation for this project was not the idea that there could be an outcome, a publication, an exhibition, although that is what it's led to. It was more just an interest in something that was going on around me in my own country, of which I knew very little about, and which I discovered there was very, very little documentary record of. The process took around 10 years, And although I haven't made any work to do with this project for the last 4 or 5 years, I'm still very much involved with the few remaining fishermen. I count them as friends. I attend their annual meetings every year, and it is my intention to go back at some point to record what is happening now. These images were made under a number of influences, one of who was a man called Werner Kisling. He wasn't so much a photographer as an ethnographer, a man who collected photographs and data and artifacts about different ways of life in Scotland. He did some work with the salmon fishermen in the 1960s, and it was his work, painstakingly collecting images, recording conversations, talking to the men about their lives, that actually inspired me to go out and make the work too. There have been a number of outcomes, as I've said. The work has been exhibited in half a dozen locations, not only in Scotland but abroad as well. A TV documentary has been made about the work, and a number of small publications have resulted. The work currently resides in the collection of the National Galleries of Scotland, something which I'm immensely grateful for. The men, as I say, have come to be my friends. I've known many of them personally and their friends. Some of them are no longer with us, have since passed away, something that I feel gives the project a sense of time as well as place. Fish that is caught by these methods, and it's a controversial method of catching fish. There are many which argue that the decline in salmon stocks in Scotland is as a result of these men using nets. That's never been scientifically proven, but it is a controversial way of making a living. And while I was making this work, I have received a number of threats. After an airing of a television program about the work, I received one particularly nasty threat, but you don't take that seriously. You just carry on, because I think the value of making work like this outweighs any kind of thoughts about yourself as a photographer. Also, to go back to the subject of the wandering Scot, the Scot who wanders the world, looking as he does for, or she does, for interesting things to do, to make, to invent, to photograph, to organize. Jeremy Sutton Hibbert started this project in 1990, just after the fall of the Berlin Wall, when many photographers from the West decided that the East, all of a sudden, was a very interesting and blank canvas. And he made a number of visits to Romania and made contact with a group of Roma people around 150 kilometers from Bucharest. He arrived at the camp, which at that time was very ramshackle, very poverty-stricken, and really quite unashamedly from a different era. Introduced himself, and over the course of 7 years, made repeated trips from his home, which was then Scotland, Glasgow, to try and really capture an essence of the people that lived there, but also to record the change that he immediately saw was going to envelop these people with the opening up of Europe and the possibilities that brought. Jeremy's work paid a lot of attention to tradition, to the past, but also was very much rooted in photojournalism, in editorial photography, and in storytelling. The 7 years that he spent were, I think, very challenging, emotionally, intellectually very challenging. And he took a break until 2004. And in 2004, he went back to the same camp. And this picture I'm showing you here is of the same place that he visited in the 1990s. As you can see, it's somewhere which has changed profoundly. Rudimentary medical services, houses springing up, a great deal of money had come into the camp. the Roma that lived there had secured very successful and lucrative business, mainly in scrap metal and other traditional Roma activities. And the cultural life was really flowing, it was developing. This particular picture, he asked me to point out that this is the bride and bridegroom at a wedding. It's one of the last images he made on the project. The bride is 12 and the bridegroom is 13 years old. Something that we find, I think, in our country and maybe in our society, quite difficult to comprehend. But Jeremy, as a photographer, understood this, and he understood a deeper value to the culture that he was photographing. As I said, he's finished this project now, and he doesn't have any immediate plans to return there. He's published some of the work in a very nice edition recently, and I think it just don't do this. And I think it's as a body of work, I think it stands testament to the perseverance of an individual photographer in extremely difficult circumstances. Jeremy's work, when he came back to Scotland, last year in 2012, he was interested to see that because of the opening up of the borders of Europe, he was interested to find out what had happened to Romanian people, Roma people who had come to Glasgow, and there were many of them. And so he did a short project on Roma people who had settled in Glasgow. It's an ongoing project, as many of the Document Scotland projects are. But I think it offers a nice contrast and almost a nice full stop to the work that he was doing in Romania, and shows a sort of continuation of that work. This is Sophie Gerard's new project, Drawn to the Land. Essentially, Scotland is about its landscape as well as its people. It's a beautiful landscape, but it's also a very harsh landscape. It's a landscape that offers opportunity, and as we've been hearing today about this region of Portugal, it has many challenges. Scotland is a vast country. Vast parts of that country are very, very sparsely populated. But within those sparsely populated areas, there are many motivated people. I was talking yesterday about designers, about photographers, filmmakers who've settled in the rural areas of Scotland, and how they have an almost pioneering spirit. They have a sense that they know that the lifestyle is going to be harsh, they know they're far away from cities, but they have a determination to make things work. And so it is with the people who work on the land. And Sophie's focus on this has been women farmers, women crofters. A crofter is somebody who has a small holding of land, usually will have some sheep and do a small-scale farming activity. The reason Sophie chose women is because she felt their voice as rural people wasn't particularly well heard, and their viewpoint wasn't particularly well expressed. Through her research, what she discovered was there were actually far more women farmers and women working on the land than she expected. And this project, which she started at the tail end of 2012, is an ongoing project which she will exhibit for the first time in a group exhibition of documentary photography, which will take place at a major UK venue in the summer of 2014. Sophie's work combines the landscape and the people, and this is an element, I think, which comes through time and again with a lot of the work made by Scottish photographers. We understand that essentially photojournalism, documentary photography, is about people and what people do, and what people do to themselves, to their surroundings, to the landscape. But that landscape is intrinsic to our kind of being as Scots, our identity. That multiple layer of identity that we have is often very much defined by the landscape we live in. Even people that live in cities in Scotland find themselves drawn to the land. As photographers, we're always seeking, I think, to make work that pays attention to the history, to the people, and to the landscape. Sophie, I think, invokes a real spirit in her work. I think she's able to communicate a quiet subtleness, which you find when you talk to people in all countries who work on the land. They have to be at one with nature. And quite often, the people that work with nature are people who are quiet. They don't give you much initially. And as a photographer, that is often a very, very hard thing to battle through. Sophie is at the point of her project now, in which she's still making contact, building up trust, building those relationships which are fundamental to delivering a really successful and interesting project. Stephen McLaren and his project Scotia Nova. Stephen has a unique eye amongst the four of us. He doesn't think so much about the longer, bigger, wider picture or wider story. He concentrates very much on the moment. In that sense, he is, in all ways of looking at it, a real street photographer. His work is quite known from London. He did a very good project on the financial crash in London in 2008, and that's what led me to Stephen and his work. We showed him at Look 11 in Liverpool, and that's when I made contact with him. I was amazed by his ability just to capture a slight absurdity, and not just in Scotland but elsewhere. And the work that he's making in the United States at the moment really is of that kind of sort of fairly unsubtle, but sort of mammoth in scale. And I'm not just talking about a stretch limo, pink stretch limo. He seems to be able to find things out which are either coincidence or are kind of fantastic metaphors for Scotland and for Scottish people. He is an inveterate traveller. He loves, like many photographers, he loves road trips. So when he's in Scotland and when he's working, he simply gets in his car or gets on his bike and he walks and he travels. He never really has any thought about where he's going. Occasionally he'll pitch up at a festival or turn up at a big event. But Stephen's happier just looking at the everyday side of life. But that everyday side of life has a wider meaning. And here's another great Scottish invention, Dolly the cloned sheep. We cloned the first sheep. Well, hey, ooh, yeah, we're rubbish at football, but we cloned the first sheep. So Stephen's work, I think, pays attention to humour, which I think is never far away in the Scottish psyche. He's also keen to dig a little bit beneath the ground of subjects which maybe to the outside world might seem a bit odd and peripheral. These are ducats, which are, to translate that from my translator at the back, places where you keep pigeons. And strangely enough, there are many of these structures across the west of Scotland. Again, Stephen's love of the absurd, I think, really shines through in his work. But there is a deeper sense that he's looking at us and looking at what we are and how we express ourselves. So when he moved to Los Angeles and then to San Francisco, where he is based at the moment, he wanted to find Scots abroad. And it probably will be no surprise. I mean, it's the same as Portuguese people abroad. When they go abroad, they almost become magnified. They become sort of bigger and larger than they are when they're back in their own country. And as you can imagine, America, with its sort of mass magnification of everything, the Scots in America are just 10 times more Scottish than the Scottish people in Scotland. And when they do things big. So if they have a gathering of Scottish people, they have a gathering of tens of thousands of Scottish people. Some of them have never been to the country. Some of them, that maybe the ancestry goes back 200 years. But boy, they're proud, and they turn up. And they wear the kilt, and they eat haggis, and they sing and they dance. All the things that we actually don't do so much in modern-day Scotland. Sorry, if is that somebody telling me to get off the stage? No. So, what do we as Document Scotland, it's not just about us, though. It is about a wider photography community. As I said at the beginning, we had a challenge, and that challenge was Scottish documentary photography dead? We'd heard that there was no good work being made. We'd heard that the trail had gone cold. What we wanted to do, first of all, is find out who's out there, what's out there, who's making work, what are they doing? Wanted to talk to photographers, but also wanted to talk to the people who are funding photography, the people who are making the decisions, the people who are selecting the photography to be shown. And there are many good galleries in Scotland showing great work. A lot of that work is made by Scottish photographers, but it tends to be older work. So what we wanted to do is reach out to that photography community and say, what have you got? What can you give us? We'll help you. We'll show on our website. We'll promote you. All sort of things that I think are quite basic, but are really important to bring together an idea of community. And I just wanted to quickly show you the work of 2 or 3 photographers that we've highlighted. We staged our first exhibition, Seeing Ourselves, which is a quote from the poet Robert Burns. And we curated it. We had the 4 photographers, the founding photographers of Document Scotland, and we invited 6 other Scottish photographers whose work we felt really represented the country and was emerging and had been made, crucially, in the last couple of years. Robert Ormerod made a series of portraits of young people involved in politics. I can only show you 2 or 3 here because of time constraints. But I think he tapped into something. He tapped into the idea that politics in Scotland is very alive, which is, I think, very different from many other parts of the world, where politicians, I think, are seen largely, and not all of them, as maybe corrupt, on the make, and maybe out for themselves and their own party rather than for a wider public interest. That's not to say that Scottish politicians are perfect, but the politics of now is a very different politics of the politics of 15 or 20 years ago. And that is because of the referendum. So everything really that happens physically, culturally, socially, artistically, at the moment in Scotland is framed by this referendum next year. It's impossible to escape it. And we as photographers, I think, feel a duty to be part of that process. Sarah Amy Fishlock, another young Glasgow photographer, made a really interesting and moving piece about entitled Middlemen. These were Iraqi helpers and translators who were engaged by the British government and army to work in Iraq as translators, as facilitators, as fixers. Of course, once that became known in Iraq, these people could no longer continue to live there. It was too dangerous. So they were resettled. There was a program to resettle them. And they were resettled all over the United Kingdom. Many of them were resettled in Glasgow, in one of the most notorious housing estates in the country. It's an estate where it's fair to say Scottish people do not choose to live. These people, on the other hand, on one hand, they do not have a choice, but the other choice they have is living in Iraq, and that is impossible for them. Sarah's work really was very intimate and very moving, and we were delighted to show that at our recent exhibition. The final set of work I want to show from the other participating photographers, Martin Hunter. Martin Hunter is a really interesting guy. He's got an editorial background, also commercial, very commercial. But we've known him, myself and Jeremy had known him for about 20 years. And we knew that he'd created a body of work which dug deeper than just what he did as an editorial or commercial photographer. And we knew he had this work, but we knew also that he was very reluctant to show it. The reason was he was just shy. He didn't rate the work very highly. He didn't believe in it. But we did, and we persuaded him to show the work at the exhibition. We've also featured it online and in one of our publications. Martin's work, there's no mystery about it to me. I think it's outstanding urban portraiture. I think it tells me certainly a lot about the country I live in, but I think it does transgress boundaries as well. I think it's universal. And I'd love to encourage Martin to make more work. But he, like many Scots, I think just has a sort of focus which is very singular, and it's very difficult to bring him out of that particular frame of mind. But it's great just to have been able to show some of his work. So what next? In conclusion, and I've got a bit more to read here, because I'm going to forget everything I was wanting to say. So from the beginning, the collective has been determined, as I said, to engage with anyone and everyone who has a love and a passion not only for photography but for the country. Having said that, we do not regard ourselves as more important than any other photographer, curator, educator, or anyone else in photography today. What we want to recognize is that we want to be part of a re-energizing and organizing photography and make sure that others don't let this moment pass. We have a duty, I feel, to leave a lasting legacy. Our belief was, and still is, that there are photographers out there making interesting and timely work in Scotland and about Scotland, and we want to be part in creating momentum to help draw attention to a conversation which is taking place in civic and cultural life in Scotland. We seek to promote, encourage, and support photography in Scotland, especially image making, which builds on Scotland's rich tradition of documentary photography. We have a website. We now have 2 publications, which we have, the second of which is fairly new, this one here. I was hoping to bring 80 or 100 copies, but my baggage allowance on the plane was only 20 kilos. So I can either auction this, or what I prefer you to do is go onto our website and buy one. We are funding, I should say that, and nicely leads into our funding. We have been completely volunteer run over the last year. The 4 photographers have given our time, have given our money and our energy to this project. We haven't brought in any revenue as such, other than a small amount through the sales of our first publication. Our next task as a collective, though, is to try to establish ourselves as a serious player in photography in Scotland, and we're hoping that that will bring in the resources that we can continue to make publications, stage events, and support other photographers. That's the aspiration. We aim to educate and stimulate debate and help to promote excellence and best practice, and to facilitate contacts and networks which will allow photographers to showcase their work and establish documentary photography in Scotland and give it a voice in the wider world. That, in short, is our manifesto. I hope you enjoyed hearing about it. These are our details. If I can ask you to visit the website, we have a Facebook page as well. Please like it. We're on Twitter at DocuScotland. Buy our publications, please. Sign up to our mailing list. And also, just keep in touch. Submit work, just keep in touch. Obrigado. Thank you very much. Good luck. Cheers, bud.
Estigas que eu apanho todo com o ovo. Olá, boa tarde. O meu nome é António Pedrosa, não é? Eu vinha falar do meu trabalho e falar um bocadinho da minha pequena carreira. O meu trabalho tornou-se mais conhecido depois do Prémio Estação de Imagem de 2012. Eu fiz um trabalho que se chama Iraquianos, que é sobre uma comunidade de etnia cigana que vive em Carrazeira de Anciães. Apesar de eu já ter alguns anos de carreira, houve aqui 2 momentos importantes na minha carreira, que foi, eu estava perto dos 40 anos e estava com uma grande crise de identidade e achei que não era por
que não me tinha tornado fotógrafo para andar a fazer o que andava a fazer. Não estava satisfeito com o trabalho editorial dos últimos anos e então decidi que queria tentar fazer qualquer coisa mais profunda em relação ao meu trabalho. E então decidi seguir a vida desta comunidade cigana rural em Trás-os-Montes. Como muita gente já sabe, isto é uma pequena comunidade cigana que vive em Carreira de Anciães, que foi expulsa dos seus acampamentos e que foi enviada para um cimo de um monte, para uma antiga mina alemã de wolframio, onde lá construíram umas barracas e onde lá vivem. E então eu propus-me fazer um trabalho sobre as 4 estações, sobre um ano da vida daquela comunidade. Felizmente, este trabalho teve uma grande aceitação por parte do líder daquela comunidade, o Sr. Batista, porque ele percebeu imediatamente que poderia ser importante para as más condições em que eles viviam, poderia ser importante ter lá alguém a documentar a vida deles. Apesar de eu ter realizado este trabalho ser de facto um trabalho de vida cotidiana, esta seleção que eu tenho aqui, que é a seleção que foi premiada no Prémio Estação de Imagem, que é um prémio para fotografia documental e fotojornalismo em Portugal. Este é uma escolha só de retrato. Esta comunidade, diferente das comunidades urbanas, perdeu o seu modo de vida com a modernização da agricultura, porque basicamente o que eles faziam eram cestos e arranjos para cavalos e andavam de aldeia em aldeia metade do ano. A partir de mais ou menos dos anos 2000, sem esses pequenos trabalhos que sustentavam a comunidade, começaram a residir simplesmente na vila e os problemas também que advêm dos relacionamentos entre a comunidade cigana e a comunidade ou as autoridades dessa mesma vila. Então foram sendo expulsos de espaço para espaço até se estarem completamente longe da vista, longe do coração. Felizmente, o Sr. Batista, quando aceitou que eu fizesse o trabalho nesta comunidade, havia uma intenção de publicar. Felizmente, este trabalho, ao ser premiado, teve uma divulgação muito maior do que aquilo que estava pensado. Porque, além de ter sido publicado em bastantes revistas em Portugal, apareceu na televisão, que é muito importante, não é? E de facto, e esta parte eu gosto, de facto, para a comunidade cigana também trouxe repercussões positivas. Por exemplo, apesar de eles terem água, atualmente também já têm umas casas de banhos públicas, que não tinham. Os arruamentos que tinham sido construídos foram limpos e refeitos. Acho que foi agradável da minha parte, pelo menos que as minhas imagens tivessem servido um bocadito para tivessem tido este feedback por parte das autoridades, ou esta vergonha por parte das autoridades. Eu, depois deste trabalho, sou eu a respirar. Eu, depois deste trabalho, comecei a construir outro tipo de trabalhos todos muito à volta do retrato. Eu fiz esta coisinha pequena sobre uma tribo, que é os metálicos. E depois peçam alguém para traduzir a parte do texto. É um trabalho muito simples, que é só retratos de facto de metaleiros. E depois comecei um outro trabalho. Este trabalho ainda está em execução, que eu chamo Famel. Famel é uma moto portuguesa bastante conhecida. Eu nasci em Angola e quando vim de Angola fui viver para trás dos montes, para uma aldeia. A minha mãe era a única pessoa que tinha um carro naquela aldeia e um símbolo da ascensão social era as motorizadas, ou estas motas. A minha infância foi, todos os meus amigos, não, tinham Famel, V5, este tipo de motas. Mas com a entrada de Portugal na CEE, todas estas fábricas que existiam em Portugal de produção de motas nacionais desapareceu e foi substituída pelas motas japonesas com muito melhor qualidade e com um design muito mais apurado. Atualmente, eu quando iniciei este trabalho, apesar de ser um trabalho basicamente divertido, eu também acho que tem bastante a ver com esta evolução de Portugal dos últimos anos, ou dos últimos 30 anos, né? Que é estas motas que eram um símbolo da classe média, de uma ascensão social, neste momento só são utilizadas por certas franjas da sociedade. Eu, por exemplo, para realizar este trabalho, a melhor maneira de o fazer é sair de manhã e ir às tascas e começar a fotografar pessoas ao redor daquele universo dos cafés e da cerveja com bagaço logo de manhã. Este é o Luís. O Luís é meu amigo, mas por alguma razão vai aparecer também, e também aparece no meu projeto Entre Margens, porque tem qualquer coisa de especial, não só por ser meu amigo. Como algumas pessoas já deram conta, e acho que já se falou mais ou menos disso, Portugal está num momento de crise. E eu, durante anos, tenho ido com os meus alunos fazer um trabalho básico de iniciação ao workshop de fotojornalismo que dou, de fotografar pesca, pescadores, essas coisas todas. E então, nos últimos 2 anos, tenho dado conta que nas zonas para onde eu vou fotografar, sempre existiu. Cada vez mais há gente que se chega junto dos pescadores e vem com um saquinho, normalmente preto, opaco, e vem pedir um bocadinho de peixe para terem a alimentação daquele dia, deles e da família. Então decidi que, por exemplo, estas imagens são feitas aqui no Porto de Leixões, na doca do peixe, da sardinha, e atualmente todas as manhãs mais de uma centena de pessoas vai buscar peixe para eles, para a família, e se calhar até para venderem aos amigos e vizinhos para ganhar algum dinheiro. Apesar deste rebuliço todo que havia neste espaço, isto é um espaço ocupado por centenas de pessoas a trabalhar, eu decidi fazer estas imagens, isolar as pessoas, ou estes respigadores, né, isolar estes respigadores e fotografá-los sozinhos, um bocadinho sem sentido do que estão e do que levam, um bocadinho deslocados até do contexto. Acho que são imagens que se eu não explicar o porquê do saco, ninguém vai conseguir compreender. E outra coisa que é engraçada é que se nota, enquanto que há uns anos atrás as pessoas, os respigadores que se viam eram basicamente sem-abrigos, pessoas com problemas de droga, agora encontra-se pessoas de todos os estratos sociais e de todas as idades. Eu trouxe umas imagens do Entre Margens por uma razão simples. Porque o Entre Margens, para mim, foi um convite impecável. Mas teve uma coisa porreira. Eu tinha uma ideia, quando comecei a construir este projeto, mas ao contrário de todos os meus outros projetos, que tenho uma tendência para os delinear bastante no espaço, e às vezes, se calhar, até no tempo. Este projeto, acho que é o primeiro projeto que eu faço onde eu saía de casa e conduzia, ia um bocadinho sem sentido, e depois tentei fazer com que as fotografias todas funcionassem num conjunto. Eu ia com uma ideia de água, ia com uma ideia de um outro Douro, de um Douro que se calhar me é mais, os meus pais são do Douro, eu sou de uma aldeia do Douro, ou que me era se calhar mais familiar, não este Douro da Quinta e de alta sociedade, não é? e das viagens no Douro. E então quis se calhar seguir por esse lado, mas não sabia. Então isto para mim todos são perfeitos desconhecidos. Eu simplesmente conduzia, parava, andava, falava com as pessoas, passava uma tarde com este homem e com este Adonis e com o resto da sua família. No dia seguinte ia para outro espaço e quem acompanhou, por exemplo, esse trabalho de longe comigo, eu cheguei a meio do projeto e estava absolutamente em pânico, porque eu tinha-me proposto fazer uma coisa que era conduzir, fotografar, e como é que vou cozer isto tudo junto e isto pode vir a ter algum sentido. Eu espero que tenha feito algum sentido. E depois há outra coisa que eu sou basicamente um fotógrafo de pessoas. E acho que neste trabalho consegui juntar uma coisa que não é muito natural em mim, que me agradou, que foi juntar paisagem, paisagem humana, e isto, a sério, por acaso, gostei de ter tido esta possibilidade e gostei de ter elaborado o trabalho desta forma. Aqui volta a ser o Luís, já tem mais barba. Eu precisava do Luís, porque acho que o Luís é sempre uma pessoa que é precisa. Ele foi preciso nas motas para me dar imensos contactos. Eu precisei dele aqui, porque isto é o Rio Tua, e eu gostava de ir. O Rio Tua é um rio estão agora a construir uma barragem, e esta paisagem toda, intocada, vai desaparecer para fazer uma mini hídrica. Não consigo compreender muito bem. Se calhar é o progresso. E o Luís é um homem que me levou a estes espaços, me levou a conhecer os sítios onde se apanha melhor peixe, onde o peixe é mais batido, onde o peixe é mais magrinho e mais saboroso. E apesar de ser pescador e caçador, é uma pessoa com um elevado sentido de natureza e de preservação da natureza. É um equilíbrio engraçado. O Entre Margens, para mim, teve piada porque vai influenciar bastante este trabalho que eu fiz a seguir. Este trabalho não é só meu, é um trabalho conjunto meu e de um amigo meu, que é o Tomás Rada, que está aí. E este trabalho, isto aqui é uma edição que eu juntei ontem. Ontem peguei umas imagens, juntei-as, porque de facto este trabalho não está finalizado. Está finalizado em termos fotográficos, a minha parte é a parte do Tomás. Nós temos uma série de projetos com este trabalho, mas ainda não sabemos muito bem como é que vamos, ou melhor, nós sabemos, mas vamos ver se funciona. E este é um trabalho sobre Fátima e sobre as peregrinações a Fátima. Fátima, para mim, se calhar é o trabalho que eu fiz durante mais anos. Acho que qualquer fotógrafo português já fotografou Fátima até a exaustão, não é? E então andava com este dilema já há 2 ou 3 anos de como é que eu conseguia voltar a Fátima e tentar fazer uma coisa que não fosse exatamente a mesma que já tinha feito no ano anterior, e no ano anterior, e no ano anterior. Espero ter conseguido. E depois este trabalho para mim também tem aqui uma coisa que eu gostei, que foi o juntar a imagens documentais de peregrinação, de peregrinos, juntei imagens de museus. Museus de cera, museus de Cristo, da vida de Cristo, até do museu multimédia, mas o museu multimédia não era multimédia demais para mim. E então, de fábricas também, temos imagens de fábricas. Nós andamos ali à volta de Fátima a tentar encontrar diversos universos que tentassem, que pelo menos desse uma outra perspectiva, uma outra vista, uma outra massificação de Fátima. Esta é uma das irmãs, antes de morrer. E esta é a última imagem. A mim pediram-me para ser rápido. Eu acho que foi bastante. Acho que já acabei.
That's the start. Is my microphone on? Oh, yeah. Have to look respectable in Portugal. So I put my jacket on. It's not normally me, really. Hi, and thank you for inviting me. Thank you very much for inviting me. I feel very privileged to be here. And I'd like to thank Nuno and the wonderful museum at Douro and Katerina and everyone at Entre Margens who made my life so easy. Because one thing I hate is something that's not very well organized. I'm quite intolerant of it, actually, believe it or not, although I'm quite a crazy man, I think. But I like things to be really organized, and this operation is really organized and organized brilliantly. So I would like to congratulate the whole effort, the whole team of Entre Margens. Really very, very impressive. Thank you. Well,
Nuno said, we want you to come and talk, Brian. You know, Andre, what's this? Andre Moishen said I was giving him a pint of bitter, of course. And I was having a pint of bitter, because in Derby, at Format, we have great pubs. Fantastic beer. And Nuno was really, get me another one, please, he said. And I bought him the second one. I thought, God, I've got to buy him another one. And you know, seriously. And he's seen one of my talks that I gave at the Format Festival. Little did he know that it was a massive, well, he was there, a massive party the night before. And I was really still so drunk, really. And I just had to gather myself together somehow. And I just launched myself on the audience at Format and just blah, 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 blah. And then Nuno came up to me and said, that was great, that was fantastic. So like at the lunch today, I had 1 beer and 2 glasses of red wine. I needed more, really. So today, it's not going to be quite as good, I'm afraid. Because one, I'm not drunk, and 2, I'm not hungover. But I said, well, what can I do? What can I talk about, Nuno? I'm like one of the oldest photographers in the country. What shall I say, you know? And he said, well, I'd just like you to do the same as Format, really. So I went, oh, all right then. So really, what it's about, my talk today, is about the fact that it's about my life, really. And it's something that I'm particularly interested in, is like coming from a very, very humble peasant, virtually peasant background, which I came from, and try and make your way in photography. And how hard and arduous it's been, and how painful it's been, but how delightful it's been at the same time. And what it's taken, really, to live the life of a photographer. This is my 41st year, really, as a practicing artist stroke professional photographer. And the pain and the effort has been immense. And when you start to comprehend to where I come from, because a lot of successful photographers in England that will remain nameless came from quite moneyed backgrounds and quite middle-class backgrounds. And they had houses bought by their parents after they left art college. I had nothing. I didn't even have a bathroom. I never had a bath until I went to art college. We didn't have baths. I grew up here amongst all these factories. I grew up just, of course, it's just off the photograph here. And I grew up amongst, this is 1947. I was born in 1948. And this is where I played as a little boy here. And that was my view out of my bedroom window. And to make, I've had the effect upon photography, hopefully I've had it to a certain extent. It's just extraordinary. I can't believe what I've managed to do in my life. It's just been basically hard work. So anybody in the audience here that feels it's almost impossible, it's never impossible. It doesn't matter how humble your beginnings are. If you work really hard and are really committed and willing to put 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 41 years, you'll get there. I'll just carry on. Okay, where did he come from? Well, I came from a very, very industrial area near Birmingham, which is in the center of Birmingham. I was born in Birmingham because they had a hospital that they could pull me out of my mother. They just cut my mother open, put 52 stitches down the front of her, and pulled me out because they could do cesarean operations in the hospital in Birmingham. So I was born in Birmingham, but I was brought up here in a place called the Black Country. And this is the view out of my parents' bedroom. This looks like a place like from a bygone age, 19th century. Well, it was really. It was a 19th century environment still. It was gas down the street. But the reason I'm showing this is me on the left here, look smartly dressed on the left. Maureen Payne to my right. Georgie Pardo. Now, Georgie Pardo is an interesting man. He eventually became a lorry driver and unfortunately met his untimely end by 2 lorries coming together. And George's coffin was about 2 inches thick. But Georgie was very famous for putting a cat in the frying pan. And so, I mean, I made this book. I thought, I grew up, what did I eat as a boy? I ate the feet of the pig, which is very Portuguese, very, very Porto. I ate, oh, these are 2 sausages making, well, they like each other. It's my racist photograph, you know? So just 2 sausages that just, if you can get 2 sausages together to feel for each other, to I don't know, say, let's bring the white people and the black people together, let's make them embrace, you know? And then we had this, the pig fat. We just fried the pig fat, the outside of the pig, and just ate it. Like, this is called a leaf scratching. These are all elements from my book, The Black Kingdom, that Louise mentioned quite kindly earlier. And these are faggots we had. I know, is American here, please? I mean, it's not the same. It's actually a foodstuff in England. And there's my mom, look. Oh, when his dad would just kill the chickens outside to the left here. Mom would get them, you know, and dad would pull all the insides out, and Mom would just get the feathers off. I lived for 22 years in that room. That room was actually 3.5 meters by 3.5 meters, and I lived 21 years in it. So I've got sympathy for people who go to prison. And this is my mother. I did a project called The Black Kingdom. It's an autobiography about my life in the 50s and 60s. And my mom, unfortunately, is no longer alive. So I had to find my mother, you know, and this woman found my mother about 100 miles north of north of London. And anyway, this was my mother. And this is my dad at his machine, a factory worker. I had parents, factory workers. And when I got to 16, they said, right, you're out of school now. I wanted to go to university. I wanted to be a fighter pilot or, I don't know, something, you know. But no, they said, out you go. So I ended up in the factory, just looking at the rats in the canal outside my window. And I spent 5 years in offices and factories. And my dad was dead. My dad's been dead since 1985. And in my book, I had to play the part of my father, because I look just like my father at my age now. I thought I didn't belong to my parents. I looked nothing like them as a boy. And they said that my mum didn't give birth to me really. They just picked me out in the hospital ward. But when I see myself now in the 60s, I'm definitely my father's son. And this is the Earl here. He owned all the factories that I could see out of my bedroom. And we went to the National Portrait Gallery, looked at all the photographs of the Earl, early 20th century. And there he is, exactly. He's an actor playing him. And here's my father. I'm playing my father, soccering. Soccering is a difficult, maybe the translator can think of it, Portuguese word. Soccering to the Earl in the factory that my father worked in. So I ended up in this office here. I ended up in 82 people worked in this office, and I worked in the desk. These are my workmates. I worked in the desk just out of shot over here. And these are all my work friends. That's the big clock in the top of the office there. And when it got to 5 minutes to 5, we'd be looking and then race down the back stairs, you know, to get the train. And that was my day. And then when I came in the morning, the boss would stand in the middle of here, stand in the middle, waiting for us to come in. And if we were a minute late, you know, it would almost be like a caning, really, which I didn't fancy. And so that's where I ended up. And below the feet of those men was a lady, one floor below in the accounts department. And she fell out with me. I was broken-hearted. So I desperately searched for what to do. So I applied to art colleges to get into photography. And I managed to get into Manchester College of Art and Design. So I became, as I am now, a photographer by sheer chance that the woman below the feet of those men fell out with me and broke my heart at the age of 21. Because at 21, you could leave home. Before 21, you had to pay attention, do exactly what your parents told you to do. So, here we go, sorry. That was the block. I was up on the 8th floor, as again, the photograph's the wrong side, on the opposite side of the building. And in my book, I talk about the man opposite me that I spent about 2 years looking at the hairs out of his nose. And so that's Birmingham, office block, 1969. And it was like an office dance, really. Kafka, because I've been in the world of Kafka, when I read The Trial in 73, 74, I knew exactly where I wanted to be. I knew exactly how to go about things. So I started as a professional photographer in 1972. And the first photograph I took that had any merit was this one. In 1974, I'd come out of photography college, less than 2 years, and took this photograph. Obviously, I'd seen, as we were talking last night, to some of the people here, German Expressionist film, I was talking to Nuno. Fritz Lang's Metropolis, obviously, the inspiration of the German cinema of the 20s. Because this is one thing I'd like to say to the students here, if there are any. We're all pretty middle-aged, I think, aren't we? Mostly, but old age in my case, in the sense that don't look to other photographers for inspiration. Look at other art forms. And that's what I did. I looked at film. Film really gave me the great inspiration, and especially the German Expressionist cinema of the silent period. And I got a book called by Lotte Eisner called The Haunted Screen, and that was my Bible. I read it and looked at the images in there. Still got it in my library. Lotte Eisner, The Haunted Screen, the history of German Expressionist cinema and the symbolism behind it. Some of the elements. Then I got my first job and started to do businessmen, really, as one does. But if you look at the businessmen at that period of time in magazines, they weren't like this. And it was quite difficult, like bad letters from the editor telling me to stop doing this, people complaining. And I would give talks, even in the 70s I started to give talks. And the audience like you there would be like really going at me, you know, giving me one hell of a bad time. But now these are like boring, aren't they, in a way? They're just like old-fashioned pictures that we've seen repeated. But in the 70s, they were quite dynamic. This was a double-page spread in a major advertising magazine. And then I took myself off to Russia. I wanted to go to Albania, Cuba, or Russia. Couldn't get into Albania, couldn't get into Cuba, but I got into Russia, 1974, on a package tour that was very controlled. I left the package tour and started meandering around the streets. Got arrested 3 times in 2 days. And left a resounding influence on me. Because the one day I was there was the October Revolution parade, and I was walking up the street. I got between the barriers and that, and they didn't stop me, and I walked up the street photographing these people here, watching. And then, sorry, this is one out of place. So this is them queuing up for bread in the shop in '74 in Moscow. And then I watched this parade with these tanks and that coming down. And they were going past Brezhnev in Red Square. And I remember taking this photograph here, and all of a sudden I felt people on my back. They just slung me into the parade. And I ended up amongst all these tanks and started marching down. And I marched down into Red Square. And I just waved to Brezhnev in the Politburo. It was incredible, really. So I came back and started doing this. The 70s was quite a grey decade in England, but I started to do this very stark stuff. This is all my own work. So I always do my own projects. And then she came into power in '79 and just changed the whole picture, the whole of the UK. It just changed. There were coffee bars in every corner. That's what I can think of, really. Coffee bars in every corner. And business became sexy. So she just fell right into my hands, really. Literally, when I photographed her almost, I imagined her falling into my hands. I felt like really sexually sort of motivated by her presence. And she was there in front of me. And this was a private commission. Some property developers gave it to me. And it all changed. All of a sudden, all the boring pictures I was taking of businessmen became important. And then I was photographing actors. This is obviously Donald Sutherland. I was doing lots of editorial work, doing lots of music as I was talking at lunchtime. This is Susie of the Banshees. And I was getting my own studio and really improving my photography. This is double exposure. I was doing really complex lighting situations. This is before Photoshop. And because I'd done mathematics, as I told you earlier, in my estimating department, I was a very good mathematician, and I understood the technicalities of photography, and I could really, really wring the neck of the technical side of photography and produce some interesting images due to being technically capable. And then, of course, I did Depeche Modes. I did the first 5 album covers for Depeche Mode, Susie the Banshees. Depeche Mode, there you are. I can't see where he is now. There it is, construction time for you. You've disappeared. And these are all double, treble exposures, all my own lighting effects that I'm developing out of bits of cardboard, elastic out the side of your underpants, all sorts of stuff. And these are all editorial. So I'm developing. Then my politics started to come into play quite strongly, I think. I started to get really cocky, quite confident. This is mid-80s now. And I'm starting to do these scenarios. These are for business magazines and annual reports, these pictures. These businessmen like fighting each other. This is the PR man of the company being stabbed in the back by the managing director of the company with his own helicopter, you know? This is for an editorial. And here you've got the head of Blaupunkt, you know, German company, his heart being measured by the man from Hewlett-Packard. It's the managing director on the left there, and the PR man from Hewlett-Packard on the right is measuring his client's heartbeat with his car radio. And here you have Ferranti, which is a military, I mean, I'm sure Colin knows them very well. They no longer exist, but they're quite a big defence company up near Edinburgh in Scotland. And here I got a truck company, this argument going on, and I just got I started to get so much more confident. I had an assistant by this time, and I said, "Oh, get one of your trucks and put it on your arm, you know." You've got to try and think back, you know, less than 5 years. You would have got this guy on the left here sitting down at his desk on the telephone, you know. That would be the shot in maybe a truck on his desk or something. So this was quite breakthrough at that time. Obviously, photographers gathered momentum, become creative, and people are doing more exciting things now. But then it was breakthrough. And then, you know, this is the section here which I'd like just to bring for more of the students in the audience. When I said earlier that it wasn't photography I went to for inspiration, it was fine art. This is a famous painting of the beheading of John the Baptist. It sits in a gallery in Birmingham, my hometown, my town of birth, rather. And here we have the managing director of Moe Chandon. Sorry, the chairman of Moe Chandon, who's here. And this is his waiter in the executive suite, the executive restaurant, with his head on the tray. You can see the strong influences from the painting prior, the behead, presenting the head of John the Baptist. Now we're presenting the head of the chairman of Moe Chandon. And I never crop any of my pictures. One thing I did take from Henry Cartier-Bresson was that he never cropped his pictures. And it made sense because all your photographs were at the finest quality because you weren't cropping into them. So all this here is all exactly framed in the Hasselblad camera. And then I take my lights out with me, of course. And so his eye is there and everything, and the eye down there, and half the nose. It's all composed in the camera. And I think if Dwight Silver's in here, who assisted me on the Entre Margens project, he'll tell you that everything's done in the camera. Everything's composed in the camera. And I started to get influence. This is when I went through a period of Jacques Tati, the French director. And this is a businessman coming to sign something, and he brushes past the pot plant and becomes the angel Gabriel. It's just thinking of ideas, really. It's just creative ideas. And once you're technically competent, you just think of a creative idea, then you just put it down on film or on digital file. But the problem with that, I suffer from the fact that I mean, if you can understand this line of my thought, I know too much now. And that can be quite a problem, is deciding which way to go. Sometimes it's better when you know very little. And then, of course, Magritte, the surrealists, always have been a great inspiration. And this is a politician, a famous politician, who always known for smoking a pipe. So obviously you can see the relevance of the inspiration there. It's Anthony Wedgwood Benn, left-wing politician in the Labour Party in our country. And then I started to be known for my business things. I had to light this vast area here 3 times in the 80s. There was money in the 80s. It was possible to do things like this. And so I had trucks, thousands of lights and everything, all day putting the lights in all these floors, all around here. But what did it mean? 2 things. I hated the fact they were building this building site in this particular part of the city of London. So I wanted to photograph it like the Battle of Somme in the First World War. So if you look at the picture clearly, you can see lots of crucifixes or death, you know, graves here of the dead. and the whole atmosphere. And this building here I put, at the time, was the most powerful, 20k HMI at the top here. That this building was on fire, as if it had been set on fire. And then exploded this mortar shell over the top of this crane. But I practiced it 1 week before. They're firing it again off to this side. And they're shooting it up here. And there was so much rain coming down. And that's why you get all these, you can see all the lights, because the rain is like pouring down. And he fired, because we had to say that if we fractured any of these buildings, hurt these, we'd have to pay for them, which would be like about 10 lifetimes of income. And when I practiced it, the firework exploded exactly on the crucifix. We're talking about in Portugal here, right on the crucifix. So it was like the coming of Christ. It was a woodcut of the coming of Christ. But because of the rain and the nervousness of the man, it fired too early and broke up higher than the crane. I wanted it to drop behind the crane and explode exactly on that cross. So it was like a woodcut of Christ on the cross. And then the police came. We'd cleared it with the total city of London, but the police had come. And they said, if you fire one more, you're going to go to jail. I had 7 goes at it. And this was a double-page spread in the Financial Times in 1986 for Big Bang, which was the explosion of the stock market. And we were doing interesting things here. The worker. I was a worker. My dad was a worker. My mum was a worker. My aunties and uncles were workers. Everybody I knew was a factory worker, and I couldn't escape it. That's all I got given, is to photograph workers and businessmen. So we made a sculpture of one of the workers at Broadgate, and then took him around the Broadgate site, because we wanted the worker to be honoured, actually, and not just... And then my father, unfortunately, passed away, and I did a personal project on the workers, like the knights in the cathedral with their tools, and become quite a famous project. These are all the workers in Broadgate, that big site where I exploded the firework, and these are all the different tradesmen. And then I went to St Pancras, which was the big railway, and then again using inspiration of fine art. Here is Fantin Latour, the French artist Fantin Latour, and I was noticing in group paintings that the people were not necessarily like in the history of photography, where everyone looks towards the camera. With groups, groups are one of the most under-photographed well, or badly photographed areas of photography, I think. There are some good ones, but generally they're very boring. I wanted to do something about it. And with St Pancras, I managed to start to have an effect upon it. This is one of the major groups there of the executives, and this is another one. And then I've taken that on to Birmingham, which is a project that I've been doing, which comes out in 1 month's time, 3 weeks' time. This is a group that I've done for the new library of Birmingham. And I've started to experiment again with like taking, I don't want to swear, but P-E-E or P-I-S-S out of Photoshop, where I just put a light on every single head, so it all looks like they're all stripped in with Photoshop, but it's not Photoshop, it's just one photograph. It's sort of taking the P out of... That's quite good, in Photoshop's with a P, and taking the P out of there, making it Photoshop. And this is something I did for Louise, which is a cathedral in Derby. This was part of, it's a group again, part of the project that Louise commissioned me to do, or Format, which was on show when Nuno came over, and a big print in the museum there. And then I got the Olympics to do. One of the things I found really interesting about digital photography, well, I'm starting to get boring actually, I'm sorry if I'm getting boring. One of the things I like about digital photography is the fact that if you use very high resolution camera, it's so real. People look like they could breathe in the images. And it really inspired me that I wanted to start to make them like sculptures, like a Kernholst. You know, or the English sculpture kind of thing, Ron Muick in the English sculpture terms, is people started to become sculptures to me. So I would just manipulate them and just freeze them. And with the high resolution medium format cameras that I'm fortunate to be able to use, I don't own them, but I can't afford to buy them, by the way, but I do use them. And they look real. You know, they're just sculptures, real people that you touch, feel. And this is a prime example of the ex-Lord Mayor of London with his colleague here. They're very important in getting the Olympics to London. I was commissioned by the National Portrait Gallery in England to produce this body of work. And there's like intrigue here. And there are stories behind all these images. But anyway, you know, creating like intrigue and questioning. I like to do that with my images. It's like leave so much unanswered so people can put their own pieces and add it together and get their own delight from the pictures rather than serving up everything they're about. And here, still playing the old political game, there's the boss on the left, and there's the young apprentice on the right. I haven't lost my truth. I hope I haven't. They're still there, you know, with feelings about people and their position in society. And these are one of my favorites. This is for the new library of Birmingham, which opens on September the 3rd. Sorry, September the 5th. These are two labourers. Labourers in English society are the lowest of the low. They're the people that clean up all the rubbish or do the most menial jobs. And they will be the biggest image within the launch of the new library. A print sort of 3/4 as big as that in a beautiful frame. And yet they're the lowest in working society in terms of, oh, I'm a labourer, that means you're very low. But they're the heroes in the new exhibition. And the book, using a book. And these two men are really quite strong, really, to get them to do that. It's not the easiest thing in the world, as you could probably gather from how they look. Oh, can you please lean on his back, please, and put a book here? They just look at me and just want to kill me, really, or something. Got to be kidding. And I'm still doing the work, as this is a young worker I've done in Burton-on-Trent recently. And here are two bricklayers in Burton-on-Trent, which is very near Derby. This is a very, very recent image. This is hot off the press. So I'm still, well, I was a worker, and I'm still interested and still photograph the work. I haven't lost myself. And I think one of the reasons is the way I changed my career. I sort of decided that I just wanted to be creative and try and exist as a creative photographer, which is extremely difficult. I find every month a real problem, I have to admit. Whilst I was an extremely high professional photographer, doing extremely well, but I felt that my life is I'm getting older and I was given a talent, so I'm going to dedicate myself to my art, my capabilities as a photographer, see if I could produce some good images. And this was for a small college in a small town near Derby. And this is again from the same college as a tutor in first aid with a crying baby. And now this is the man that's moved all the books to the new library of Birmingham. What do you do with a man who's going to, you know, take 10 million books from here and put 10 million books there? And this was my solution to that. And this is one of the important librarians. And I thought I'd finish off with these, the fact that if you look back to 1972, 74, 76, I haven't surrendered, I haven't submitted, I haven't been, I don't know, polluted. I'm still, you know, fighting and strong, you know, in my ideas, in my beliefs. And so, in a way, that's the one thing I'm quite proud of. And thank you. Ooh, hot. Thank you. Whoa.
Concluir perguntas e respostas. Olha, está sem micro.
Yeah, perfect.
Sentar.
Your friend. Really
You what? Thank you, Edward. Most kind.
Ora, antes de mais, gostava de agradecer a intervenção dos três oradores. Queria, se calhar, para subirem um bocadinho a luz da sala agora, para podermos dar início, então, à parte do debate. Não sei quem é que quer começar por colocar questões. Há alguma questão? Tem, só uma hora. Por favor.
Eu não sou fotógrafo, sou apenas um entusiasta na matéria, portanto tenho um bocado de medo que esta pergunta seja um bocado parva, mas pronto, vou fazê-la na mesma. E acho que ela pode, no fim de contas, não é dirigida a nenhum dos três em especial, porque tem a ver com uma questão que eu acho que verifico nos três. Ou seja, penso que nos três, como fotógrafos, eu percebo que há trabalhos a preto e branco e trabalhos a cores. É muito simples, eu gostava de saber onde é que... ok, se calhar é melhor esperar para o Brian, né? Portanto, dizia eu que vocês como fotógrafos, penso eu que em todos os casos, e também vou dizer isto outra vez para o Brian ouvir, que ela penso que não ouviu, eu não sou fotógrafo, portanto esta questão pode ser um bocado parva, não sei. Mas tem a ver com a velha questão do preto e branco ou do black and white, ou melhor, do preto e branco e da cor. Eu gostava de saber em que momento é que é tomada essa decisão, quer dizer, se é uma decisão tomada conscientemente antes, se é tomada a posteriori, como é que isso é feito? É só uma curiosidade. Obrigado. Não sei muito bem quem é que pode responder, acho que podem ser todos.
Brian?
No,
That's you.
it's you.
António? Colin?
I generally make the decision before I start, and I never change color into black and white. I just stay. If it starts in color, it finishes color. I don't really play around with it like that. But yeah, I usually always have a fairly strong sense of what I believe will be the best medium, whether it will be color or black and white. When I started 25 years ago, I worked exclusively in black and white, and there was a three-stage process of identifying the subject, taking the image, and then making the print, and all three were equally valuable. So for me, the craft in the dark room was almost as important. I mean, taking the photograph is the primary moment. But the making of the print in the dark room, for me, was a very, very special event. It was something I really thought of as part of that process. I've never printed my own color, so that was something I lost when I stopped making black and white work.
Em português, pode ser, mas tens a tradução. Não sei.
Assim como a Colin estava a dizer, eu acho que antigamente era sempre uma pré-decisão. Né? Agora já não temos essa questão de ser ou não ser uma pré-decisão. Enquanto antigamente fazia-se sempre uma análise do que é que se ia fazer e decidia-se, ok, vou fazê-lo em preto e branco, vou fazê-lo em cor, vou fazê-lo em slide. Nós agora temos sempre uma hipótese secundária. Normalmente eu faço sempre as decisões antes, mas também já me aconteceu eu sentir, em trabalhos que eram destinados a ser cor, eu sentir que não havia consistência na cor, que é uma coisa que me preocupa muito atualmente nos meus trabalhos, que não ter consistência nas seleções que faço e essa consistência conseguir ser ultrapassada com a simples mudança para preto e branco. Já me aconteceu essa decisão a posteriori. Mas eu acho que normalmente a decisão é sempre a priori.
In my case, as you know from my talk, I became a photographer almost by accident, by default. And I didn't really want to be a photographer, but I happened to become one, and I had to make a go of it. So most of my early career was using film, of course, because I started in 1972 as a professional photographer. And I hated color film. Any chance I could get to take the photograph in black and white, I would take it. To the point where a lot of my photographs that I'd exhibit were originally in color for a magazine, but I used to change them into black and white for myself. When digital photography came about, it changed my outlook upon color in black and white photography altogether. I could play around with my color. I could drain it, so there's very little color, or I could keep it colorful, or I could take it all away. From 1991 to 2001, I spent that decade being a film director. And I realized the psychological effect upon how your material looks like. As you can see with Instamatic these days, or Lomo cameras or anything. If you use old 8mm film, it looks really old-fashioned, although you film it today. It has a psychological effect upon the viewer. So I tend to use black and white when I want to emotionally and psychologically influence the viewer to think that I recorded that very natural event. It psychologically gets into the head, maybe not so much now because everyone's doing color, but that it was a real event that I captured. And it also seems to create an element of surrealism as well, black and white. It tends to push the image into a bit more of a surrealistic flavor. And generally it's far more atmospheric as well, as we can see from Pedro's great work of the Romanes in northern Portugal. It tends to be far more, I don't know, so much more oomph to it, I think.
Mais uma questão ali. Só um segundo, por favor.
His political position during that phase of his work. Now we look at the document Scotland. As you've said, document Scotland has been produced in an environment, a political environment, with 1 year to go till the referendum. Is there a risk that document Scotland becomes a political document with a political agenda? And if that is a risk, is that a problem, or is that something you would assume?
Yeah, I suppose it is a risk, but we're very conscious of maybe a bigger picture than the kind of current political debate. I think we're part of a conversation that's happening, which actually goes beyond the kind of strictly political event which is going to happen next year. And it's about identity, it's about the future, it's about now. So it is framed in politics, but it's a wider debate which takes in, all different creative media, artists, writers, poets. And I think there is a danger that individual political or politicians or political motives can hijack, a collective like ours. But I think we're very aware of that. I think it's a difficult one because you want to be impartial, but often if you're impartial, it means you're not engaged. And it means you're kind of copping out of things. You're just not taking an active part. So we have got to be part of this political debate. And I think there is an inherent risk that you could be exploited. But I think we're experienced enough And I think we're close enough to the issues to understand the dangers. And I don't see, to be honest, I haven't seen any evidence that politicians want to sort of kind of jump on our bandwagon. We talk with politicians from both sides of the debate. But it's a wider conversation about something slightly bigger rather than just the narrow yes, no question. But yeah, I mean, we're always aware of that. Does that answer your question?
Just a quick follow-up, though.
Sure.
The collective, you have 4 members. Without asking you how you might vote in the future, do you have different views within the collective?
Yeah, we do. Okay. We do. We have, I would say we have 2 people that are very strongly in favour of independence, and we have 2, I would say, agnostics. Okay. But the people that are in favour are working on the people who are agnostic.
Thank you.
I'm not saying.
Well, congratulations for your 3 presentations. They were great. I enjoyed them a lot. About 10 years ago or something, I was studying, and everyone said that photography was going to disappear because of technology. Haven't things turned around? And the fact that everyone takes stills hasn't really asked people to look at true photography, really good quality photography. And is this good for you and for photography, for professional photography? Does this make sense, this question?
Kind of needs a question on the end.
Well, the question is 10 to 15 years ago, people say, everyone is a photographer, so photography is not an art form. Now it seems that the fact that everyone is sort of more educated in visual terms and taking photos, there's more public. It seems that there is a renewed interest in photography. So is it easier to live as a photographer now? Do you think things will turn around?
Well, I mean, this might go on for a couple of minutes. Because it's an interesting question to me, because I'm really very fond of certain elements of photography which I feel are primarily disappearing. That is the appreciation of light, and life maybe, but light. There's more emphasis upon image construction today than there was before. That was an inherent element within the various elements that make up a great photograph. That has tended to come towards the forefront these days. And so you see a lot of photography that is not that well executed, but the image is quite interesting. And also you see a lot of photography that looks very similar. Whilst in the case when people were being taught at colleges, more so than they are today, in the art of lighting and starting to understand and appreciate light, you tended to find that photographers on the whole, there was great variety between their work, which you can't see so much these days. I would never go as far as to suggest that the photography of today is any weaker than the photography of the past, but it tends to become relatively similar. Everyone seems to be condensing to, I need someone to help me on this English word, maybe even the translator, homogeneous. It's becoming a little bit of an homogeneous body of work. So I think that photography has gone through a massive transition due to the developments of technology, but it has not necessarily enhanced the number of great images that are taken in the world today. Although everybody seems to be a photographer today, because most people that are actually executing photography or regard themselves as photographers are absolutely awful. 99% of the people that do photography are actually awful at it. But of course, the best ones are incredible at it, because it's so difficult to do. And so in the old days, there was maybe out of 20, 18 were not very good, but 2 were good. Now, these days, out of 100, 99 are awful. And that's the difference that technology has brought to photography, I think. No, I think that we see more of it these days, but most of it's awful. But we see more of it, of course. But there is still great photography done. Excuse me, it's just the fact that there's so much done that we see most of it's awful.
Brian, following up, actually, this topic about the digital, I'm quite curious because you came from an old school kind of photography with the film. You've gone through a lot of phases.
Can't hear that.
Okay, I'm going to repeat it again. I'm quite curious about knowing your opinion about all these digital technology changes we're going through. Because you came from a long time in photography, you've gone through the film process, you've done all the different things. And your work is very much about constructing the work. It's not only, it's very political, it's very funny as well, but as well it's very constructed. What are your views upon the digital world? I would say that the digital world for you you'll open even more the world for you in terms of constructing the images. That normally the people from the old school are more reluctant in terms of accepting the digital things. I'd like to have your opinion because I can see you in a different opinion that like the digital even give you more power to construct the images and be more creative. What's your view?
I mean, I really adore digital photography. I think it's a great development in photography. As I said to you earlier, between 91 and 2001, I directed TV commercials and music videos and things. So we were always having in playback that we could look at. You know, someone walked across the floor and knocked over a table. We could have a look, see if it looked good, and if it didn't look good, we shot it again and looked at it on the screen. So when digital photography came around, I could open my computer up, stick the cable into the back of my camera, and start to see what I was doing. It was fantastic, because what I'd been brought up with was Polaroid. You know, I'd pull the Polaroid out of the back of the Hasselblad, put it under my armpit, wait for 30 seconds, and have a look at it. And I would be photographing, say, somebody, and the wind had come, you know, and taken their hair, and their hair was like made the shape of a swan or something coming out the top of their heads. And I'd go, oh, that's great. Look at that swan coming out the back of that top of that man's head. And I'd try and recreate it again, and I'd never get it. But with digital photography, I got it straight away, because it was there. And the first time I used the digital camera, I didn't even believe I'd got it. You know, I thought, well, now we have to do the picture. But I'd got it. So it was a wonderful, wonderful thing. And secondly, with digital photography, if you use lights, it's so incredible because now you break up your exposures into tiny fractions. All the lights operate with digital tints, cameras with digital tints. So when you look at the beautiful paintings, say, in this museum, a photographer now can bring all that subtlety and nuances into their work. Whilst when it was filmed at a time, you know, it was like clunk, half a stop, third of a stop maybe, clunk, clunk, and film, develop it absolutely perfectly, and still not get the subtlety. But now with digital photography, we can do beautiful, subtle images. Constructed images, that's what you were asking me. With constructed image making, yeah.
I've got a sort of slightly different take on it in that I'm doing my best to shoot as little digital now as possible. So I mean, I have to for editorial clients or commercial, fine, that's one thing. But for my own work, I'm in this funny situation, which I think most photographers are now that use film, that we still end up with a digital file, working on a digital file. So it's kind of between one and the other. But my reason for using film, I shooting medium format, you know, with a Mamiya 6 and 12 exposures, is not so much the photography, although obviously that's primarily why I'm there. It's the process. It's the process of reining back that idea that this digital camera, it's not a camera, it's a machine gun. It fires so many bullets, you can hardly control it. So for me, it's about doing the opposite. It's about reinventing a time when we really looked at things, really thought about things, And also, we didn't get things, we missed things. So I mean, the project I'm shooting at the moment, I shot a portrait, and I just took 2 images of a woman. And then by something I did, I didn't wind the film properly. So when it came back, she's cut down the middle. It's malfunction of the project. It's my fault. It's pilot error. But in a way, I kind of quite like that. That really is my skill and the material I have in my hand. Because if I shot that digitally, I probably would have shot 20 images of that woman, not 2. So, I don't know.
But there is a, sorry, I love what Colin's doing. There is a difference in this. Colin's saying, you know, obviously if you've got the camera around your neck, then he's right. You know, you can just go bub, 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 bub. But if you're constructing the lighting and constructing the image, there has been no change, obviously then. It's the same as it was with film. Because all the effort goes into the construction and the lighting of the image, which is I was trying to talk about earlier. Yeah, but I'd just like to substantiate that. Sorry, Colin. I mean, you're right. I mean, I hate that when I hear the machine gun going off. I mean, that's awful. You're right. I wasn't disagreeing with you. I was just saying there was a difference. Yeah.
Do you have a... You're not going to come up there.
Okay.
Eu fotografo em filme e fotografo em digital. É uma questão de processo. Acho que ultimamente tenho fotografado bastante em película por causa daquilo que o Colin estava a dizer, porque me obriga a não ser tão espontâneo, obriga-me a pensar mais as imagens. E o facto de eu poder pensar mais as imagens, mesmo que seja no meu estilo documental das pessoas que sem lhes tocar, obriga-me a fazer mais uma pré-visualização, a prever mais o que é que se vai passar. E essa parte agrada-me a mim, não na perspectiva de um teste, mas na perspectiva de tentar perceber melhor, em menos shots, o que é que se vai passar. Mas não vejo assim grande diferença, exceto película.
I would like to, if you allow me, to make a link between this panel and the panel which we had this morning about the festivals. Because we had photo festivals in the morning, now we have 3 photographers, and I think that those 2 worlds do not map entirely. There is still a gap between them. And I would like to know from you what kind of relation you have with those photo festivals, where you have a new role, which in my view is perhaps in most cases playing a role which is more important than photographers, which is the curator. And my experience with curators is that I would say 80%, 90% of the curators know very little about photography. They come, most of them, from art or from the art environment, from history of art, from or even from School of Arts related more with painting, and that creates, I think, some misunderstandings between photographers and curators. So I would like to know what, as photographers, what is your relationship with, what kind of relation, what we have to say about the photo festivals we had this morning. Thank you.
I'm probably the obvious person to start with that, because I've been, until last month, heavily involved with the Liverpool Photography Festival. And as a working photographer, when we established the festival, the kind of needs and requirements of photographers was central to us setting up the festival. The festival came through the organization Red Eye, which is a photographers network. So our focus was really on photographers. Where there's a disconnect, where things disconnect, is that there is very little money that can be offered to photographers in terms of commissions and direct spin-offs from festivals. So what you often find is that a festival will have a large one, a medium-sized or even a small budget, but very, very, very little of that money can be given out as a commission to a photographer. Most of the money goes towards organisation, administration, presentation. That's kind of just inevitable, because without the resources to make the festival won't happen. I think I was talking to a couple of photographers at lunch about this, and I said I wanted to answer this because I feel very strongly that festivals do offer opportunities to photographers, because I think the networking, the availability, the access to people. When I was a young photographer, before the age of the photography festival, I couldn't dream about sitting next to it and meeting and talking to somebody like Brian Griffin. It just didn't happen. I think if I was a young photographer starting and I was in this room today, and I don't know how, I don't know, I'm not going to put any pressure on Brian, but I am sure he would make his time available to those photographers to talk to them. And I think the exchange of knowledge, the networking, is something that you may not be able to quantify immediately in terms of money, but over the course of your career, the contacts you make, the work you will see, the networking you will achieve, the ideas that you will come up with will really advance your career as a photographer if you're prepared to then take the advice that you hear and move forward and work, like Brian says, work. So I think the relationship between festival and photographer is very positive. We've heard one or two examples of where people feel they're exploited. People feel that they're giving money, maybe for a portfolio review, and they aren't getting anything back. These are exceptional. The majority of festivals, I believe, are photographer focused, honestly.
Yeah, do you want to go, Stephanie? I would like to substantiate everything that Colin has said, really. I play a patron's part, which is a supportive role to Louise, who's the director of the Format Festival. And I find it immensely rewarding, just being tangentially involved. And I can tell you, for one, is that I think any photographer who's really serious about photography, then you have to really attend the photo festivals. In my career, they've helped me enormously. Let's look at it basically. You produced a body of work, and then you're showing it at a festival. You can see your work on the wall, so for once you can stand back and have a look at what you've done. It's framed there. You can hear people's comments, sometimes adversely, sometimes constructively, sometimes patting you on the back. You can get this response, and it nourishes you. It makes you want to do more. You feel, wow, I like this feeling. I can see all my work in this room, and it feels really good. I can feel what's wrong with it, and I'm going to make sure I don't do that again. I know I'm showing too much here. I'm going to be more clinical in my editing. Something I want to get out of it. And then people have said it's quite good. So, well, I feel quite good about my work. I'm going to carry on with this. And it nourishes you and makes you feel better, and you get educated responses. And if you get somebody good next to you, you'll say, that's a load of rubbish. That's how I grew up. When in the 70s, the art directors would say, that's a load of rubbish. You go back and do that again. And I try and do that myself. I find it hard if someone comes and, I said that earlier, didn't I, 99% rubbish. But I go up and say, sorry, that's really bad. Or, wow, I really support a photographer. I do now with Louise and Format. I support photographers. I say, that is great work, and here's the prize. Or, I don't know, things happen. But, so I don't want to cover what Colin said, because he said it so succinctly and so correctly. But they are such positive affairs. Festivals are so good for photography. They're so good for you as a photographer. They're so wonderful for you as an appreciator of photography. If you're a curator, you can learn from it. You can learn how good or bad you are as a curator. And exactly what that gentleman said who asked the question, there's some really bad curators in photography. There's probably more 99.9% bad curators in photography. Only 99% bad photographers. And the gentleman was correct. But you must go to festivals. They're so vital in the longevity of your career. The only way you keep on doing work is by getting some work or getting noticed your work or your work getting published. And the way to do that is to go and show it at photo festivals or meet people that possibly could show it in the future. So they're brilliant, I think.
Eu sou perfeito exemplo de... Eu sou o resultado, ou o meu trabalho, ou a minha carreira nos últimos anos é o perfeito resultado do Prémio Estação de Imagem. Né? Porque apesar de eu ter uma carreira editorial, ela só se tornou mais divulgada, não pelos editores de fotografias das revistas, mas através do Prémio Estação de Imagem. E eu acho que há aqui uma mudança de paradigma que aconteceu há uns anos atrás, que é, antigamente as pessoas podiam fazer, os fotógrafos podiam fazer show-off em revistas, em publicações. Atualmente não é possível. As revistas, então em Portugal, pegando neste exemplo, não é possível ao domingo fazer-se um portfólio absolutamente espetacular, absolutamente consentido e que tenha levado tempo a ser fotografado e que tenha levado esforço. Por isso, a única solução que nós temos é fazer trabalho pessoal e tentar levar esse trabalho pessoal a festivais, a concursos e ver o feedback. Porque, por exemplo, apesar de eu ter ganho o Prémio Estação de Imagem em 2012, eu senti que dentro do júri, nas conversas que tive com o júri a posteriori, que havia pessoas que estavam a favor que eu tivesse ganho, havia pessoas que achavam que sim, mas que não eram a favor da minha fotografia, porque havia vários grupos dentro de um júri. E essa parte também é espetacular, que era um grupo de 5 pessoas, era a Marion Duran, a Ariana Rinaldo, Emílio Morenati, e mais 2 pessoas, o Patrick Baz e uma francesa, que agora não me lembro do nome, e sentir que havia forças com interpretações e com gostos diferentes, é uma coisa muito interessante. E por exemplo, em Portugal, por exemplo, o que se está a passar hoje aqui, o que se passa, por exemplo, também na Estação de Imagem, são coisas terrivelmente interessantes, que é nós, fotógrafos portugueses, termos a possibilidade de sermos julgados e termos a opinião por parte não dos nossos pares habituais, mas de outros pares, de pessoas que são, de facto, respeitadas. E eu acho que temos que aproveitar, nós temos que produzir o nosso trabalho e temos que produzi-lo individualmente. E depois temos que ir bater às portas e temos que ir ao Foto Espanha, temos que ir a Braga e temos que mostrar os nossos trabalhos a um painel de fotógrafos, de editores. Repara, por exemplo, destas pessoas do júri que eu te falei, a maior parte deles nunca tinham sido fotógrafos. E eu acho que atualmente os melhores editores de fotografia nunca foram fotógrafos. Porque não acho que para ser editor de fotografia seja necessário ter sido fotógrafo.
Who had not been photographers. I said some curators who don't know anything about photography. That's something different. We had a complete background coming from the art world. So it's of course you may have a very good vision on photography, or a very good knowledge on photography, without being a photographer. But yeah, you must have dedicated your life to seeing photography, reading about photography, and so on. And that's what is missing in some cases.
I mean, I think that a curator that is really good curator of photography is incredible. I think the photographer can learn quite a lot from the curator. I mean, I've gained a lot of knowledge and ability to look at my pictures in a more clearer way and a more, I don't know, just see my pictures far more clearer through a top curator. They're astonishingly good. That's why I say, when I say 99.9%, is the reason behind that is because a good curator is a phenomenal talent, really. And not many people can possess that talent. Like photography. You know, not many people can be great at photography because it's so difficult. But they can enlighten the photographer. You know, you have your exhibition at a festival, and if there's a good curator at the festival, you can look at your work, and then you move on to another level, whilst people who don't get their work exhibited in galleries or with good curators and festivals are like, may stay at the same level, but it helps you to move on a little quicker and get educated and be a better photographer. I can't say anything negative about a festival. I think they're fantastic things. And I never miss my festivals every year. You can't miss your photographic festivals. They're vital. I'm really happy to be here, thanks to the custard tarts in Nuno.
Ok, então se calhar fechávamos agora as intervenções. Passava a palavra ao Nuno, que vai fazer um pequeno resumo do que ainda temos hoje em termos de programa, e podemos continuar também a conversa lá fora.
Queria agradecer a todos e esse belíssimo painel. Queria, por isso, relembrar que nós temos, para quem, as pessoas que fizeram, que se inscreveram para o jantar, às 7 horas, no Arroz de Forno, ali na Mozinha da Silveira. Depois temos às 9 horas, a visita às exposições começam nas Cardosas, na Praça das Cardosas, onde vamos poder ver os trabalhos do Dato, da Aracélia e da Inês Nogueira Mesquita, e também do António Pedrosa. Por isso, o que ele teve a falar aqui agora podemos ver ao vivo lá, nas Cardosas. Depois seguimos com os fotógrafos para a Praça, para a Avenida dos Aliados, onde vamos ver os trabalhos do Brian, do Daniel Blaufux, do Gil Sibin e do Marnot, e do João Pedro Marnot. São muitos nomes, peço desculpa. Depois completamos a noite por volta das 10 horas com o espetáculo Sons do Douro, que vai começar na zona ali na zona dos Loios, Lago dos Loios, com uma arruada de bombos, e vai concluir no cimo da Avenida dos Aliados com um concerto com pipos de vinhos transformados, para ter um espetáculo que será bastante forte e que exatamente vai ligar essa parte mais da tradição da região com a contemporaneidade e a nova criatividade. Por isso, convido-vos, pelo menos a estarem a partir das 9 na zona das Cardosas, Aliados, porque depois temos vários espetáculos. Os que não puderem, amanhã voltamos aqui ao local do crime por volta das... Já são muitos horários. Amanhã recomeçamos aqui às 2h30 com o painel, com 2 painéis à tarde de curadores. Vamos ter curadores de Inglaterra, ligados à agência. A Fiona é uma curadora ligada à agência Magnum. Vamos ter o Éder Chiodeto, que é o curador do Museu de Arte Contemporânea, de Arte Moderna de São Paulo. Vamos ter o Luiz Felipe Catarino, da agência Forci, e o Ricardo Nicolau, do Museu de Serralves. Por isso, muito obrigado, boa tarde e vemo-nos mais logo. Obrigado.